My stepdaughter introduced me as her mother's personal custodian at her wedding celebration. Her mother, my spouse, chuckled and remarked, "Indeed, that is all he is." I offered a calm smile and quietly moved away. What transpired next was quite unforeseen. Allow me to recount everything. First, let me quickly express my gratitude for your continuous support. It genuinely means a great deal to us. If you appreciate the narratives we share, please consider subscribing to this channel. It would be wonderful if you could leave a comment indicating your city. We might just give you a special acknowledgement in our forthcoming story. Today's special recognition goes out to Caleb Stone from Chicago. We're delighted you find our stories engaging. Now, let's delve deeper into the narrative. When I wed Harper Hayes, it was clear I wasn't merely gaining a spouse. I was inheriting a rich tapestry of history. She had a daughter, Lyra Lawson, from an earlier union, and their bond was exceptionally tight. The kind of symbiotic, sometimes conspiratorial, always closely woven connection unique to single mothers and their daughters. I never aimed to become a paternal figure. My intention wasn't to replace Lyra's biological father. I simply wished to be a steadfast, dependable presence. My presence in their lives was like a quiet, reliable current, akin to a craftsman ensuring a house's foundations. Unobtrusive, essential, and largely out of the spotlight. I settled invoices before they were even mentioned. Offered transport when Lyra's vehicle suffered breakdowns. Recalled birthdays that even her own mother occasionally overlooked. And I accomplished it all without demanding a claim. It was simply how I was raised. If you cherish someone, you bear the burden when it becomes cumbersome. You don't tally the score. Yet, as seasons turned, a subtle chill began to creep in. Being consistently dependable made me imperceptible. During family meals, conversations would drift around me as if I were merely an item of furniture. Lyra never introduced me to her acquaintances beyond a vague, my mother's spouse. I was rarely included in family group chats or pivotal decisions. Initially, I dismissed it. I convinced myself it held no consequence. I was a dozen years Harper's senior, and perhaps that made me easily overlooked in their quicker, more flamboyant world. I had no need for the limelight. But what I failed to grasp was that imperceptibility isn't neutral. It's a form of erasure. And when you've been erased for too long, the day someone sketches a caricature of you in public, the resulting laughter resonates like a sharp blow. That day arrived at Lyra's wedding celebration. It was a radiant Saturday in early summer, one of those flawless days where the heavens were a startling azure and every face glowed with nascent hope. I had orchestrated much of it, booked the elegant hall, secured the caterer's deposit, paid the artisan photographer in full. I didn't mind the effort. It felt gratifying to provide, to grant Lyra the day she had envisioned. I stood at the periphery of the reception area, observing guests as they danced and conversed. Harper looked resplendent in her sapphire satin gown, and Lyra was radiant in her delicate lace dress. I was content to fade into the background, sipping sparkling water and ensuring the DJ had all his requirements met. That was my designated role, the unseen logistical anchor. Then, sometime between the second round of celebratory remarks and the slicing of the cake, Lyra beckoned me closer. "Everyone, meet my mother's personal custodian," she announced with a bright, jocular grin. Truly, he's been safeguarding her for years. The guests chuckled. Harper, standing beside her, added with an amused ripple in her voice, "Of course, that's all he is." She didn't even glance my way as she uttered the words. My name remained unspoken. Not my stepfather. Not Taryn. Merely a designation, a function, a prop. I smiled. That was my sole reaction. I didn't allow the corners of my mouth to droop. Didn't scowl or flinch. I simply maintained the smile and retreated, gliding through the assembly like a phantom slipping through walls. I exited the celebration quietly, unobserved. No one called out to me. No one inquired as to my whereabouts. I returned home, poured myself a drink, and sat in the gloom, watching the ice dissolve. The earlier laughter echoed in my ears, amplified now. Not because the jest was particularly vicious, but because it was thoughtless. It was the sort of jest made when you've already concluded someone is inconsequential. That night, slumber eluded me. I lay in bed beside Harper, her breathing steady and oblivious, while my mind replayed every instance I had been the invisible man. Every occasion, I assented when I should have remained silent. Every time I settled the bill when I should have paused. The affection I bestowed wasn't transactional, but it was certainly not expendable. And suddenly, I realized my anger wasn't rooted in their jest. My anger stemmed from their sincere belief in it. Deep down, they regarded me as serviceable, not vital, helpful, not human. That night, something within me liberated itself, not with a clamor, but with a profound clarity. I would no longer be their backdrop. I awoke the following morning with the taste of silence in my mouth, acrid and chilling like coffee left out overnight. Harper was already awake, humming to herself in the kitchen as if the previous evening had never unfolded, as if her husband hadn't been publicly diminished like a hired guard before 100 attendees. I dressed deliberately, methodically. Each motion felt intentional. There was no fury coursing through my veins, no dramatic outburst poised to erupt, just a pristine, acute comprehension that the boundary had been violated, and I was finished allowing others to delineate me without my consent. Downstairs, Harper was preparing coffee, the aroma of over-roasted beans permeating the space like a minor vexation. She glanced up and smiled. "Morning. Everything unfolded so beautifully yesterday, didn't it?" Her eyes sparkled with contentment, as if she anticipated my nod and shared delight in her daughter's flawless occasion. I regarded her, not with disdain, but with something deeper, a recognition. This was a woman who had never once paused to consider that perhaps her husband no longer wished to be the silent benefactor, that perhaps her concept of partnership was perilously one-sided. It did. I stated evenly, pouring myself a glass of water. She appeared joyful. Harper nodded, unaware. "You were such a blessing. Lyra mentioned you even managed to get the floral designer to rectify the arrangement at the last minute. Honestly, I truly don't know how we'd function without you." That sentence lingered in the air a beat longer than it should have. Not, "I don't know what we would do." No, it was how we function without you. As in, you are utilitarian, as in, you are an implement. It didn't feel like gratitude. It felt like an affirmation of what had been jocularly uttered last night. I was merely the man who made things operate. No appellation, no position, no genuine presence beyond my utility. I took my seat at the table, watched her spread cream cheese as if nothing had changed, and stated, "Incidentally, I've canceled the honeymoon arrangements." The knife paused mid-stroke. She looked up slowly. "What do you mean?" I contacted the travel agent this morning, voided the flights, secured refunds for the hotel and the excursions, the entire package. Everything has been reversed." She blinked. "You're jesting." "I am not." The ensuing silence was ponderous, so dense it pressed against my chest like a second skin. Her eyes narrowed, mouth slightly agape, as if attempting to decipher the foreign language I had just spoken. Harper had never witnessed this iteration of me. She was accustomed to the quiet supporter, the steady hand. But that man had been retired. What sat before her now was an individual who had just redrawn every boundary in permanent ink. "You can't do that," she retorted, her voice sharp. "Lyra and Gran are scheduled to depart tomorrow." I took a sip of water, then met her gaze. Then they should have reflected twice before deriding the man who facilitated those plans. "It was a joke, Taryn. Don't be so overly sensitive." And there it was, the phrase that invariably follows cruelty masquerading as wit. I had encountered it countless times in various forms. "It's merely a jest. You're overreacting. Don't take it personally." But you see, the issue is people only utter such things when they are punching down, when they know the recipient will not retaliate. What they label as humor is frequently just cruelty with impeccable timing. And for years, I had joined in the laughter, even when the joke was at my own expense. It was not a jest. I articulated slowly. It was a communique, one I received unequivocally. She rose, anger now etched on her face. "You're penalizing her for being a little glib at her own wedding." I remained seated. "No, I'm holding her accountable for years of treating me like a glorified ledger, like her mother's errand runner, like someone who didn't merit acknowledgement by name in a room full of people I helped finance to feed." Harper's complexion flushed crimson. "This isn't characteristic of you." "You are correct," I conceded. "It isn't, but perhaps it should have been." She stormed off then, phone in hand, likely to contact Lyra and inform her that the honeymoon was off. I felt no concern. I had been many things to that young woman: chauffeur, event coordinator, financial backer. But one thing I had never been was respected, and I couldn't conceive of a more opportune moment to cease pretending that didn't matter. My generosity had become an expectation, not a boon. And the instant I diverged from their anticipations, suddenly I was the antagonist. The telephone calls commenced within the hour. Lyra's name illuminated my screen like an alarm. I allowed it to ring, then Grant, then Harper once more. I finally answered after the fourth attempt, steeling myself. "Taryn," Lyra began, her voice already laced with entreaty. "Mom said you canceled everything. Is this some sort of misunderstanding?" "No misunderstanding," I stated flatly. "But we're leaving tomorrow. Grant already took time off work. Everything's packed. I'm certain you will devise a solution." Her voice descended into something more venomous. "Why would you do this? Over a joke?" I exhaled slowly, because it wasn't just a joke. It was the latest in a protracted series of reminders that you do not see me. Not truly. I have been nothing but generous towards you. And you could not even extend the courtesy of addressing me by name at your own wedding. You opted to transform me into a punchline. Lyra fell silent. I heard her sharp intake of breath. Then, almost childlike, "I did not intend it that way." "I know," I stated. "That is the fundamental issue." And I terminated the call. The house regained its quietude, but this time it was not serene. It was the sort of quiet that settles after a seismic event, when the dust subsides and individuals emerge from beneath the burden of their presumptions. I felt no triumph. I felt no cruelty. I felt clarity. Sometimes clarity is the sharpest form of tranquility. The peculiar aspect of boundaries is that people only acknowledge them once they are finally upheld. Prior to that, they merely perceive an open expanse, permission, passivity, silence masquerading as accord. But once you delineate a line, even gently, even softly, it feels like a declaration of war to those who have been disregarding it for years. That morning, I had not raised my voice or slammed a door. I had not uttered profanities or hurled accusations. I had simply retracted something I had freely offered, and one would imagine I had set the house ablaze given their reactions. By noon, the phone calls had become relentless. Harper moved through the house like a thundercloud, slamming cabinet doors, muttering under her breath, refusing to meet my gaze. She had taken the bedroom phone into the bathroom for a 20-minute whisper discussion with Lyra, punctuated by the occasional sharp, "I know," and he's being absurd. I made no effort to eavesdrop. I held no interest in defending myself in a tribunal where the verdict had already been inscribed. I had articulated what needed to be said. The remainder was for them to contemplate. Then Grant Gilbert appeared. He knocked as though he resided there. 3 rapid taps followed by the doorbell. When I unlatched the door, he wore that tightly lipped, taut-jawed expression a man adopts when striving to conceal anger, yet seething just beneath the surface. He was clad in a crisp collared shirt and chinos, as if he had dressed specifically for confrontation. "Hello," he greeted, hands in his pockets. "May we converse?" I stepped aside and permitted him entry. He strode directly into the living area as if on a mission, as though he believed a personal appearance would compel me to revoke the decision. I remained by the doorway, arms folded. "I grasp that you're displeased," he commenced. "And I simply wish to convey on behalf of us both that we apologize if the jest was misconstrued." "If," I stated quietly. He flinched slightly. "I mean, we meant no offense. Lyra genuinely values everything you've done. We both do. I think perhaps it was just the strain of the day. You know, people speak without forethought." "That is precisely the core issue," I replied. She did not think, because I am not someone she has been conditioned to consider. Grant sighed and settled onto the edge of the sofa, as if suddenly overcome by weariness. "All right, look, I understand. You're wounded, but canceling the honeymoon, come on. That's monumental. We are supposed to depart tomorrow." "You still may," I stated. "Just not at my expense." He rubbed his face. "We cannot afford it right now, Taryn. You are aware of that." I leaned against the door frame, allowing the import of that sentence to sink in. There was again that presumption that I was the fallback, the buffer, the safety net, the individual who could be dismissed in one breath and relied upon in the next. They had constructed a system around me, and it never once occurred to them that I might disengage from the control panel. I'm not accountable for mending what disrespect fractured, I declared. Grant looked at me then, not with indignation, but with something akin to burgeoning confusion, perhaps even respect. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally rose. Understood, he conceded. It's your funds, your prerogative. It is not about the funds, I clarified. It is about being acknowledged. And you both looked directly past me. He nodded slowly, then departed through the doorway without another utterance. I did not follow. I felt no smugness or triumph. What I felt was more intricate, like someone who had finally uttered no after years of yes, and was still learning how to exist with the sound of his own refusal. That evening, Harper barely addressed me. She reheated leftovers without inquiring if I was hungry, then dined in front of the television with the volume excessively loud. I could sense her resentment radiating from her in waves. And still, she offered no apology. Not for the jest, not for her laughter, not for anything. Her silence wasn't capitulation. It was a tacit protest, a penalty, a message that if I did not resume my role, I would be excluded from the aspects of the relationship that rendered it tolerable. But I did not yield. I ascended to our sleeping chambers, closed the door, and lay on my back, gazing at the ceiling. I contemplated all the instances I had quietly covered expenses, Lyra's automotive repairs, her graduate school tuition deposit, even a down payment on the wedding venue. No one had solicited it. No one had offered thanks. It had simply been assumed, and I had permitted it because I yearned to be virtuous, helpful, indispensable. But the cost of that role had imperceptibly accrued, slowly draining something fundamental until I scarcely recognized the version of myself who had once believed love was meant to signify unending sacrifice. That night, I accessed the confirmation emails for the canceled voyage and forwarded them to Harper with no subject line and no message, merely proof that I was serious. And then, for the first time in years, I slept like a man who had nothing left to substantiate. Harper finally confronted me 2 days subsequent. Though confronted might be too potent a term for what actually transpired. It was more of a performance, half indignation, half reluctant armistice. She waited until I had settled into the armchair with my coffee, as if calculating the most disarming juncture. I knew she had been communicating with Lyra incessantly. Their voices murmured behind sealed doors, behind the hum of bathroom exhaust fans, and the white noise of a dwelling that was no longer neutral territory. When she materialized in the doorway, arms crossed, expression rigid, I could already discern this wasn't about comprehension. This was about restoring normalcy. That word had begun to feel like an anathema. She's contrite, Taryn, Harper stated without preamble. She's genuinely sorry. And frankly, I don't believe this retribution aligns with the transgression. I did not look up. I stirred my coffee, allowed the silence to settle between us like ash. It is not a penalty. It is a rectification. Harper huffed. She was anxious. People utter foolish things when they're nervous. It was her wedding day. And what about you? I inquired, finally raising my eyes to hers. You participated. You laughed. That halted her. Not for long, just a blankness, a tremor in her posture. Then she rolled her eyes slightly, as if to convey, are we truly going to delve into that? I meant nothing by it, she asserted. You know that. I used to believe I did, I countered. Now I'm not so certain. Her arms dropped to her sides, and for a fleeting second, something akin to vulnerability flickered across her countenance. She advanced further into the room, settling onto the edge of the couch as if unsure of her welcome. I understand you feel slighted, she stated, attempting a soft tone. And I will concede, I should have intervened. I should have corrected her immediately. I didn't think it would resonate that profoundly with you. You've always been so unwavering. That word again, unwavering. I mused if they disseminated it in some clandestine manual. Chapter 1. Extol his reliability. Chapter 2. Portray your disrespect as his inherent strength. Harper, I began quietly. Do you truly grasp the extent of my efforts for you? For her? Have you ever paused to genuinely observe? She hesitated. Of course I do. No, I stated. You apprehend what I provide, but you do not perceive me. There is a distinction. She looked at her hands, and for once had nothing to articulate. I leaned forward. I have borne the burden of this household for years. financially, emotionally, logistically, and I never voiced complaint. I did not solicit accolades, but I also did not anticipate being ridiculed before strangers. I did not expect to be reduced to a mere concierge when I have done more for Lyra than her biological father ever did. Her head snapped up at that. You are not her father, and that, I stated, has never been more discernible than it was that night. She flinched, whether from guilt or defensiveness. I could not discern. Likely both. She rose abruptly, pacing. So what now? You're disowning her completely? No, I stated. I am disowning the version of myself that allowed you all to believe I had no limitations. She ceased pacing. So what form does that take? I shrugged. Less offering, less intervening when you are both out of your depth. More personal space. One can cherish individuals and still delineate boundaries. Harper stared at me as if she were witnessing something or someone she had not realized was present all along. Perhaps that was accurate. Perhaps she had married the concept of a husband who resolved difficulties and only now was encountering the man who had been subsumed beneath that role. She wishes to visit, Harper stated after a beat. She desires to apologize in person. I will lend an ear, I stated, but I am not interested in another if you were aggrieved discourse. Harper nodded and exited the room. Not irate this time, merely quiet, contemplative. That was noteworthy. Lyra arrived the following afternoon, wearing that expression adult children adopt when attempting to appear innocent once more, as if a precisely timed smile will render them 6 years old in your estimation instead of 30. She brought cookies. I did not touch them. She sat across from me at the kitchen table, hands folded neatly, and began to speak. I've been pondering your words, she commenced. And you are right. I have taken you for granted. I have perceived you as the individual who makes things function. And perhaps I leaned too heavily into that. Perhaps I forgot you were a person, not merely a support framework. I remained silent. I desired her to continue, not because I craved additional apologies, but because I needed to confirm this wasn't rehearsed, that it wasn't merely damage control. She proceeded, when I referred to you as custodian, I thought it was amusing, but I did not consider its implications. And then when Mom laughed, it felt like we were sharing a private joke, and you were excluded. And I regretted that sensation later. That final part sounded genuine. I do not anticipate things reverting to their previous state, she confessed. But I wish to re-earn your esteem. I nodded. That was sufficient for the moment. Not because she articulated the perfect words, but because for the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She was looking at me without expectation, simply with accountability. She left the cookies on the table. I still did not consume them. That night, Harper reached for my hand in bed. I allowed her. We did not speak, but her grip was firmer than usual, as if she understood something had shifted, as if she was holding on. Not to me, but to the realization that I was no longer solely bearing every burden. I did not announce the alterations. I simply began to embody them. Subtle at first. I ceased checking Lyra's vehicle registration reminders. I did not replenish the emergency cache of currency Harper kept concealed in the kitchen drawer. I declined when asked to front the expense for a plumber after her friend's toddler flushed a plaything down the guest commode. These were not punitive measures. They were recalibrations. I had conditioned everyone around me to believe I had no limits, no demarcation that declared enough. But I possessed one, and it was closer than they ever perceived. The first time Harper noticed, truly noticed, was a week later when her credit card statement arrived and she did not see the automatic payment processed. She inquired half-casually, as if it were a minor oversight, if I had neglected to pay it. I informed her, no, I had not forgotten. I had simply decided not to any longer. You always settle it, she stated, confusion tightening her voice. I used to, I replied. That was before. Her mouth opened, then closed. She stared at the envelope, then at me, as if I had spoken a tongue she did not quite recognize. And perhaps I had. Perhaps, no, sounded alien emanating from my lips. But the more I uttered it, the more proficient I became. And with each refusal, something peculiar transpired. I felt lighter, as though every superfluous responsibility I shed returned a small fragment of myself that I hadn't even realized was absent. Lyra did not call as frequently after that. Not that she had ever been the type of daughter who checked in unless she required something. But now the silence felt deliberate. I suspected she was nursing her grievances, regrouping, perhaps even complaining to Grant about my newfound coldness. Let her. People dislike when you alter the terms of a relationship for which they benefited. That is not malevolence. It is mathematics. You subtract the effort, and the balance shifts. You begin charging interest on your time, and suddenly they behave as though you are bankrupting them. Harper, to her credit, attempted to adjust. She cooked more often. She ceased leaving items on my desk with yellow adhesive notes bearing the inscription urgent. She inquired before assuming, yet I could sense the resentment simmering beneath the surface. The quiet murmuring when she believed I was not within earshot. The sighs, the gradual withdrawal of affection, as if she were bartering with silence. For years, I had made it easy to love me because I demanded nothing. Now that I sought respect, the affection arrived with stipulations. I began allocating more time outdoors, walking, sitting in the public garden, driving aimlessly, simply to breathe without being needed. There was a liberation in those modest escapes, as though I was reacquainting myself with the individual I had been prior. I volunteered as guardian of a familial unit that never fully made space for me. I recalled my fondness for classic jazz recordings, reading wartime memoirs, repairing objects with my hands, not because they were broken, but because I discovered solace in the process. I procured a new collection of implements for myself, not because anything necessitated mending, but because I did. One evening, I returned home later than usual. Harper was awaiting me at the table, wine glass in hand, the atmosphere heavy with that profound stillness that only manifests when someone has been rehearsing their forthcoming words. "Are we in a good place?" she inquired. I slowly removed my jacket, hung it up. "Define good place." She sighed. "You are different. This entire situation with Lyra, it has transformed you." "No," I stated, taking a seat across from her. "It unveiled me." She appeared genuinely pained. "You used to be so benevolent." "I remain so," I affirmed, "just not with individuals who believe generosity is an entitlement." She blinked. "That's not equitable." "It is not intended to be equitable," I countered. "It is intended to be forthright." She leaned back, glass cradled in both hands like a shield. "So what now? Are we merely two strangers cohabiting?" "I hope not," I stated, "but I am not reverting to who I was. That iteration of me vanished the evening you laughed." Her eyes welled, but she did not weep. She is not a woman who weeps readily, not even when matters are disintegrating. That is something I once admired about her fortitude. But now I perceived it differently. Sometimes strength is merely the capacity to disregard the harm you're inflicting because it leaves no visible mark. We sat in silence for a prolonged period after that. I did not offer her solace. She did not reach across the table. It was the most candid moment we had shared in months. Later that week, an invoice arrived for Lyra's alternative honeymoon. Something last minute, something domestic and more modest. She had clearly managed to assemble it. The bill was addressed to me, inadvertently forwarded through a mutual acquaintance who was unaware of the new protocols. I folded it, replaced it in the envelope, and left it untouched on the counter. When Harper observed it, she did not inquire. She simply walked past it like a test she had already failed. I wasn't striving to impart a lesson. That is not the essence of boundaries. They are not disciplinary measures. They are dignity, and mine had been stretched too thin for too long. Now it possessed definition once more. One evening, I booked a secluded cabin for myself. A weekend escape to the mountainous terrain. No bump, no declaration. I left a note on the refrigerator that read, simply, hiking. Do not await my return. I brought my books, my records, my new implements. And as I drove away, I felt no compunction, no apprehension that I would be missed, required, or judged. Only tranquility. Sometimes the most significant transformation arises not from confrontation. It emerges from disengagement. I had not shouted. I had not demanded apologies. I had simply ceased manifesting in the ways they had grown to anticipate. And in doing so, I finally manifested for myself. The cabin was nothing extravagant, merely two modest rooms nestled into the shoulder of a pine-clad incline. No television, no internet, just the steady murmur of wind rustling tree limbs, the occasional scurry of unseen creatures, and the rhythmic creak of floorboards beneath my steps. It had been years since I had been somewhere so tranquil, where I wasn't listening for another's voice, responding to another's requisites. The stillness did not intimidate me. It comforted me. It reminded me that serenity is not found in distance from others. It is found in proximity to oneself. And I had been far from myself for far too long. I spent the initial afternoon reading, then napping, then traversing a path that meandered around the fringe of the forest. I did not check my mobile device. I did not ponder Harper or Lyra's activities. I did not feel like a husband or a stepfather. I felt like a man who had endured something. And in a way I had. Not a conflict of violence or bloodshed, but one of erosion, a protracted, gradual wearing away of my identity until only my utility persisted. Emerging on the other side was not marked by grand triumph. It was marked by stillness, by the realization that I did not need to justify myself to be vindicated. I had been vindicated the moment I ceased tolerating disrespect. On the second day, I sat on the cabin porch with a cup of coffee and a small journal. I began to write, not for anyone else, not as a correspondence or an admonition, but for myself, just thoughts, fragments of the man I had interred beneath all the roles I had assumed. I wrote about the first instance Lyra solicited funds from me years ago when she was 23 and her credit card had been frozen. I had not even hesitated. I wrote about the manner in which Harper had begun presuming my assistance as if it were oxygen. I wrote about my silence at the wedding, that feigned smile, the moment I departed and no one observed. And with each sentence, I felt a little more like myself once more. That evening, I grilled a modest cut of meat over the fire pit. I dined alone beneath the celestial expanse. No melodies, no conversation, just the crackle of the flames and the taste of something earned. I realized then that solitude does not invariably signify loneliness. Sometimes it signifies clarity. Sometimes it is the only space where you can perceive your own voice again after years of it being drowned out. When I returned home 2 days later, nothing dramatic had visibly shifted. The dwelling still carried the scent of lavender cleanser. The sofa cushions were fluffed in the customary manner Harper always arranged them, but something imperceptible had transformed. Harper looked up from her tablet as I entered. She did not inquire, "Where have you been?" or "Why did you not call?" She simply scrutinized my countenance for a prolonged moment, then stated, "You appear rested." I affirmed. She nodded slowly. There was a trace of melancholy in her eyes, but also something else. Respect, perhaps, or resignation. Either way, she did not press. She simply allowed me to be. That was novel. Lyra did not reach out. Not in the first week, nor in the second. I surmised she was waiting, testing the waters to see if I would revert to the man I had been, but I did not. I managed my own finances. I maintained my own schedule. I allowed them to navigate their path without leaning on me like a crutch they never acknowledged. A month later, I received a card in the mail. No return address, just a plain white envelope with my name inscribed in blue ink. Inside, a straightforward message. "Thank you for everything. I regret it took me this long to truly see you." It was unsigned, but I knew its sender. It was the first time Lyra had written to me. Not texted, not email, but genuinely sat down with a writing implement and paper. It did not rectify everything, but it was something. I did not respond. That is the essence of boundaries. They are not barriers to exclude individuals. They are reflections. They reveal who values you when you're no longer performing for them. They reveal who remains when the benefits are gone. Harper and I remained together. Though our dynamic underwent a shift, we conversed more cautiously. She ceased assuming. I ceased volunteering. We evolved into something quieter, more reciprocal, perhaps even more candid. Affection does not always roar. Sometimes it simply learns how to request instead of expect. Months elapsed. Then one evening, we were invited to a family gathering, Lyra's birthday dinner. I attended. I did not offer to cover the cost. I did not bring a gift valued at hundreds. I brought a card and a small leather-bound notebook with her initials etched upon it. Something thoughtful, something understated. When she unwrapped it, she looked at me. Her eyes softened. "Thank you," she uttered, and she articulated it as if she truly meant it. Later, as individuals conversed cheerfully around the table and the candles flickered low, someone requested Lyra to introduce those seated nearest to her. She went around her friends, her cousin, her mother. Then she looked at me. "And that's Taryn," she stated, her voice steady. My mother's spouse, and one of the most quietly significant individuals in my existence. No jests, no laughter, just that. I nodded. That was sufficient. On the journey home, Harper reached for my hand. She did not utter a word. She simply held it as if it held meaning. And for the first time in a prolonged period, it did.